Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay Show. I'm your host, Cory Camp, and today I'm excited. We've got another micro episode for you. These are shorter than our typical episodes, and my favorite short and sweet colleague, Dr. Kim Ramadan, is joining me. She is definitely much more short and sweet than I am when it comes to, but we can talk forever though, Kim. We really can.
We can.
So Kim is on to talk about something that she and I have both really been focusing a lot on, especially with the coaches and the leaders at district and campus level that we have been working with, which is differentiated coaching and how differentiated coaching, when you put that into action with your teachers, can even support and deepen teacher reflection. And this is all about our empowering teachers, which is the theme for November and December this season. And so let's start, Kim, with this idea of differentiated coaching. I feel like we've got to kind of break these two apart and then put them together again. So differentiated coaching, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are a lot of different ways to coach. There are a lot of different resources for coaching. There are a lot of different ways to say, to go through the coaching cycle. And we're going to get a little bit into that next. But I think the first thing to note is no matter what cycle you're using, no matter what person, you might be looking at Jim Knight, you might be looking at Elena Aguilar, you might be looking at Paul Baverick Santoyo, and no matter who the person is or the book that you pick up, typically there are these steps in coaching, no matter who you're coaching. So you're usually developing some sort of baseline data. If Cory or I were to step into a classroom, we did not know the teacher at all, we would need to gather some baseline data. You can do that through video, you can do that through observation, but you're going to need to know something. If you're looking at actual student data, you're going to need to have that in front of you. But the next thing is developing some sort of learning target. Where do you want to go? We are here, wherever the baseline is, and we want to go from here to here. And so what's that end target? That target might be something that happens in a week, in 2 weeks. That end target might be something that happens a month from now, a half a year from now, or a year. It doesn't really matter. That third step, though, I feel like is something that we talk about a lot, developing a plan for reaching that target. So sometimes we set these goals. We have these, really elaborate goals that we set that we don't always think, how are we getting from A to B to C to D? We only think about A to Z, and then we don't have a plan in between. And I think sometimes that's where people, coaches fall flat or teachers fall flat, or it just is not fully developed. And then we're looking at each other like, why didn't that SMART goal go through? Like, why did we not meet that goal? And then at the end, of course, we are going to execute whatever that plan is and reflect on how things have gone.
Yeah. And I think, just like in the classroom, when we talk about differentiated instruction, we have some set outcomes, some set targets for our students. And we understand kind of the data that the students coming into those, that learning target with. But if we don't do a great job of designing that instruction with differentiated embedded, and differentiation can happen in many different ways, but we know with our student learners that there's no one size fits all. And the same is for our teachers. Differentiated coaching in the corporate world is, called situational coaching. What's the individual's situation? And how do we help them get from, I have a learning target, to executing and even then reflecting on that so learning can continue. So I think this is huge for folks to think about. And I want to also talk about how you mentioned like cycles. I recently read I think it was a Twitter post, and I forget who it was, but I loved their thought because I've been, kind of saying this for a while in not so many words, probably not so few words, which is, stop kind of pigeonholing yourself into like, I'm a big fan of Jim Knight's impact cycle and the process for which that goes. But for some people, that's a week-long process. For some people I coach, that takes a couple of months. For others, it's, a day or two, just a couple of things that we're doing. So don't make yourself feel like you've got to maybe go through all 4 of these steps. You may already know your teachers and know the data behind them, and they've got a very clear learning target. So we really are kind of starting with number 3 with them. And number 3 may be something that has multiple steps in it, or it might just be a 1 or 2 step process to get them to their Z, to their target. So, coaching doesn't have to be this long, formal, drawn out thing. It can take on many, many forms. And that's really been the thing that the folks that we've been working with this year, Kim, right, they've been kind of like, oh, I thought coaching had to be this specific thing. I thought it had to be this get better faster. I thought it had to be this impact cycle that goes through all of the steps and does all of the things. And I'm really seeing that there's a lot of flexibility within kind of that format, right?
Yeah. And I think when I was a new coach, I read, one book and I thought, this is the way that coaching needs to be, or I was trained in this one way. And I was like, this is how it needs to be. And then as you develop as a coach, and I think that's okay, like to have an anchor at which to start. Yeah. And then, as you have, you build up your tool belt and your tool case, and eventually it just becomes this really heavy thing with all of the ideas in there. You have strategies from Teach Like a Champion. You have Get Better Faster, which really gives some great tips for people who are especially beginning teachers, but sometimes for anybody. Then you have like, okay, but we really need a cycle. Like, how do we actually do this coaching thing?
A workflow,
and I think, and I think you can kind of mold all of that into what works for Cory Camp and Kim Ramadan and whoever else that is. So it's okay to start somewhere, and as you should. But there are a lot of other really great names in the coaching world that have produced texts that are not huge names too. So I think that there are a lot of resources out there. Once you have them, how you do that coaching cycle also depends a lot on your school or district or the place in which you work, and your abilities to see people and as often as you can. So I think there are a lot of factors that go into that. Like, do we coach on a weekly cycle or a bi-weekly cycle or a monthly cycle? There are a lot of different ways to do this.
Yeah. Well, and right to this point, something that if you're viewing this episode and not just listening on the podcast, if you're listening on the podcast, be sure to check out our notes and takeaways for this visual, or check us out on the video channel of your choice. But one thing that we've been talking about, or helping people kind of create a connection to, because again, differentiated coaching, like we can connect that to differentiation in the classroom for learners. Also thinking about, our multi-tiered system of support, thinking about there's different tiers or intensities or frequencies of support for learners based off of their particular needs and what those specific goals are. So I love this visual that you've kind of curated for this topic today. So why don't you walk us through this just a little bit?
Sure. So, I mean, the whole point of differentiation, whether it's for a student or a teacher, is that it's different. It meets their needs as a learner, whether it's an adult learner or a student learner. So taking this idea of differentiation into coaching, I just developed this chart to kind of, in my mind, I might be working with these, 6 teachers in a building, but they all need very different things. And they all are on different, what we'll call tiers, in terms of support. So the first column is the focus that they need. As you'll see, there are a couple that have the same focus of student engagement, but they're all on different tiers. So that's the second column, is like, maybe tier 1 is someone who might need pretty intense support. Maybe I meet with them weekly. Maybe our cycles are weekly if that allows, or bi-weekly. And then we also have tier 2 and then tier 3, which are people who may have more experience or just need less support. Doesn't always equate to the amount of years a teacher has, because let's be honest, like that also varies quite a bit as well. I have some year 10 teachers who might need more support depending on what the thing is. If it's a new curriculum, we may all be to tier 1 because we're all still learning. So those, so it's not necessarily the amount of years that a teacher has, but the amount of support is that tier. And then teacher actions would be like coming to the table or coming to the coaching. What does that teacher bring? And then coaching action is what is that coach's responsibility or the coach's action that they're doing. So, I mean, for example, if you look at the 2 student engagement ones, you have a tier 1, which is they need a little bit more support. That coach might model and do more of like the heavy lifting and the support and the modeling, followed by a debrief and followed by planning for next steps for that teacher and how do we gradually release whatever that student engagement topic is. And then but the tier 2 person might be more of a co-teaching situation. They might not need as much intense modeling as someone who is in a tier 1 situation. And this is just an example of how this could look a million different ways. We obviously have the first row is someone who might need help with planning support. The second row is data analysis. Maybe the third one, I kind of went off someone that Cory is coaching currently who really wants to focus on technology. And then the last one is leadership. So someone who might be in that tier 3 place where they really don't need as much support maybe with what's happening inside of the classroom, but they might actually need some support in leadership and really building up their capacity to be a leader because maybe that's their goal.
Right. Well, and you brought up some of the teachers that I'm working with right now. I have 2 that this year there's a specific technology tool that they're wanting to use for the purpose of student participation, engagement, also to bring in a couple of other elements they're focusing on, like social emotional learning and, building some specific phonics skills. And the tool that they've both chosen, they're both in different grade levels, happen to both be on the same campus, is the same tool. And one teacher just needed a kind of ideation kind of session. We got together, we talked a little bit about, okay, here's what that would look like now that you're back in person, because she had used this tool in online instruction and remote instruction last year. And so I was just trying to think about how does that transfer into an in-person classroom with everybody here? Will it work? How do I get them logged in? And the next step was, okay, when are you going to implement it? And what are some things that you're going to do? Well, before I could circle back to that teacher, she sends me a video and is like, look at us go, and I didn't need to be there with her the first time that she did that, use that tool in her classroom with her students. And she kind of had it going right from there on. The other teacher, I got to spend the morning with her class this week, same tool, same utilization, same kind of purpose. But that teacher wanted some more support on technology because her previous experience in using technology like that with one-to-one devices is it doesn't always work. And I was glad I was there because that day the Wi-Fi was awful throughout the whole school. And so we had to kind of reimagine what that experience was going to look like as we introduced that tool to the students. And the next day she sends me a video and things are going great in that classroom. But she really needed that for that first step of success, needed me to be in that classroom, right? So a little bit more intense versus another teacher just needed some conversations, get some ideas, needed a sounding board, and was comfortable moving forward from there. So our teachers need different things. They have different preferences for collaborating, for learning together. Different resources might be helpful. One teacher may need a model in their classroom with their students or a co-teach, versus another might benefit from just seeing a video or a template or a tool, and then they can transfer that into how that might look in their own classroom. Yeah. So there's no one size fits all, right, with our teachers, which is good news, right? It doesn't mean we have to do this big, heavy lift, intense cycle with all of our teachers, because then you think, how am I going to help more than 2 or 3 teachers at a time? Well, now you can really start to flex yourself just a little bit more and find different ways to support different levels of teachers. So I love the idea of thinking about your teachers and your supports in these different tiers to differentiate.
Yeah, there was a teacher that I worked with in North Carolina who really just needed help dissecting the math assessment, the NWEA. And so a lot of the work that I did with her was not actually in the classroom. I obviously saw her in the classroom a few times, but she was magnetic in that classroom. She didn't need anything from me. But she did need some help with this, pretty intense reports, analytic reports that she was getting. And so that's where we spent our time, so it can be very different. Or of course, if there's a new curriculum, which there often is, that is another place where maybe that coaching is really intensely done in the planning phase of instruction. And then the actual execution for certain teachers may be fine once they really internalize those lessons. So, I think it just goes to show that it does not need to look the same for every single person, nor should it, because teachers really feel valued when they're like, this is something that I really need to work on. Can you help me with this? And then, yeah, of course, that's my job. And if I don't have the expertise, let's say in the curriculum, I'll find someone who does, who can help us, together to do it.
Yeah. Sometimes the best, next action for a teacher is not the coach providing the support. It's a peer. It's connecting them to a peer or facilitating that kind of kickoff of that collaboration so that they can learn from their peers. And again, what I love about that is you're widening your network of support and including others. And it's not all just on your shoulders as a coach. So I think that's huge. So let's then tie this to deepening teacher reflection. Kim, can you make that connection for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think considering where people are in these tiers, we can also consider that too when it comes to reflection. And one of the things which we're going to talk about in a little bit is a conversation with Pete Hall that we're going to be having, where he has a wonderful book that's out that we use a lot with our cohorts. And he talks a lot about how teachers can be kind of in these places where they're either unaware of, the idea of reflection because they just don't know yet, or they might be in more of an action stage or refining their reflection. So when you think about the tiering of teachers, it's not always in planning, assessment, and instruction. It might also be in the idea of reflection. So people who are in an unaware stage might need a little bit more support from you as a coach to develop that idea of reflection. It doesn't always come naturally to people to reflect, to even have the idea of reflecting. Whereas for some others, it might be more of just asking questions, especially with that leadership tier 3 person. It might be all about, supporting and asking the right questions so that they are reflecting. But without that piece of reflection, we just kind of have this goal and we might accomplish it. But if we don't ever say, hey, what worked, what didn't, and why, then we're not really like thinking about it, or it's not going to become a lifelong lesson for that teacher or for the students.
One of my favorite quotes from one of the books that we use with Pete Hall, and Kim mentioned it. Pete is he's a co-author of one of the books that we use for our coaching and cohorts, and he and his co-author Elisa Simral, who has been in a few of our webinars here at Sibme before, have written several books around this idea of reflection in schools. And one of my favorite quotes of theirs is that we must ask teachers or others, really, it doesn't have to be a teacher, to think more than we ask them to do. And oftentimes, and I know when I first became a coach, my thought about coaching was, oh, I come in, I give them some feedback, and I tell them what they can do to strengthen their lesson or the learning or whatever it is. And sometimes that went over well. Sometimes it didn't go over so well. But even when it did go well, what happened was I was right back in that room again, the next lesson, the next unit, asking them to do the same thing because they hadn't transferred that knowledge of doing this strategy or trying this skill or using this routine to this other context because they hadn't thought about it, right? They were just following those directions. And so that's huge. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned from Pete and Lisa's work is that we've got to consider the reflection. That reflection is the thing that ties that nice bow around the learning. It's the thing that makes it not just an activity, but truly learning. And there's some very specific things that you can do depending on an individual's reflective tendencies. So Pete's going to be talking with us about this in our next episode next week. He's coming on December 3rd, Empowering Teachers Through Self-Reflection. And he's going to come back for a special Coach Replay episode where we're going to open it up, maybe even bring some panelists or some people in to the show live, but we'll also be taking live questions, just a quick 30-minute Q&A with him on December 7th. So definitely huge, definitely connected to this idea of differentiated coaching, which I think is, again, if you're not asking your teachers to think or helping them deepen their thinking or their reflection, then you're going to constantly be working with those teachers probably at the same tier level the whole year because they're not really growing or learning from those experiences of coaching with you. So that's huge.
I love that. And I'm excited for Pete Hall to come on the Coach Replay show.
I know, we definitely geeked out. Kim had DM'd him on Twitter and said, hey.
You never know. You never know. The power of social media. We were laughing about that in our phone call with him. We were like, this is amazing. You can really, lot of, things not so great about social media, but one great thing is you can connect with people with anyone. So we're excited to have him on the show.
Yeah. Speaking of connecting, if you've got a question about this idea of differentiated coaching or any of the visuals or things that Kim's brought to our episode today, be sure to comment below and we'll get back to you for sure. But if you've got other ideas or things that you want to share or ask, you can always reach out to us. Be sure to follow us, follow, subscribe so you never miss an episode because we've got so many good episodes, especially this season. I've been so excited about season 3 for the Coach Replay show. So, Kim, I think I brought us a little bit longer than our typical micro episode.
It happens.
But I really do think we could talk about this differentiated coaching a lot. So maybe we'll come back and talk about some other strategies, some other ways to kind of bring things in to this idea of differentiating our support for our teachers. So thanks for bringing that. It's a great way to empower them for sure.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, well, be sure to download our notes and takeaways for this week, or if you've subscribed via email, signed up for these episodes, you'll get not only the episode replay, but also the notes and takeaways right in your inbox. So let us know if you need help getting signed up for those. All right, folks, we'll see you all next week. Thanks again.